Okay, hi everybody. So, welcome to our panel on thinking about how libraries can provide support for VR researchers. And I want to just start by saying I'm Janine Stefanucci from the University of Utah. I am in the psychology department there and have started recently working very closely with libraries on our campus to think about instruction in VR and partnering with them, doing research in VR, and also having support for infrastructure for VR. And I'm going to let the panel members sort of introduce themselves one by one and tell you where they're from. I think this will be a really interesting panel because we have a lot of unique people who have not been to VR before and are coming to us from libraries. So I'm really excited for them to introduce themselves and to talk about what they have been focusing on in their own library settings when applicable. So maybe we should start with Brandon Patterson, who also helps co-organize this panel.
Great, thanks so much, Janine. Yes, so my name is Brandon Patterson, and I'm at the Eccles Health Sciences Library at the University of Utah, and I'm the technology engagement librarian there. So in addition to virtual reality, we're also working with 3D printers and makerspace material, as well as some virtual cadavers. And then we're also doing some work in kind of multimedia audio-visual equipment. And so with the virtual reality piece, it's really been something our library's been really excited about. We've had several in the healthcare field with interest in having ways that virtual reality can assist, like Janine mentioned, in instruction and research. And so the Eccles Health Sciences Library recently formed a research group called XR Utah, or VR Plus. And as part of that group, we hold an annual VR symposium. We have a website being developed. We have a listserv. And so part of this is just to get these people in the same room so we're talking and having these conversations about VR.
Okay, great. Maybe we should have TJ introduce himself next.
Great, thanks. I'm TJ Farrell. I'm the Assistant Head of Creative Spaces at the Marriott Library at the University of Utah. So I have more of a history in computer lab management and service desk management. Got into virtual reality services for a campus-wide audience a few years ago, and effectively the library provides 4 services to campus. As best we can. We provide equipment checkout, so people can check out really any number of headsets. We try to stay on top of the latest developments there. We have a teaching lab that has 10 machines in it with headsets. We have open lab space that's available for students, faculty, and staff to use anytime the building is open. And we're also working on building out development space so that projects can kind of seed and grow in the library.
Awesome. Okay, maybe Roger and then Greg, you all can introduce yourselves.
You're muted, Raj.
There we go. I'm having problems with my spacebar. Sorry about that. I'm Roger Altizer. I'm from the University of Utah. I'm the co-founder of the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program. If you believe in things like rankings, we're the top-ranked public school games program in the world. And then I'm also the founder of the GAP Lab, the Therapeutic Games and Apps Lab. We are actually located in the Eccles Health Sciences Library and have been presenting and speaking and writing with them about technology and libraries for years. Been doing VR for a long time, and I'm excited to be here and chat about how libraries are key to the success of this.
And my name is Greg Bayless. I'm Associate Director of the Therapeutic Games and Apps Lab. So I've worked with Roger for like the past 4.5 years, developing all sorts of medical, therapeutic, and educational games and tools, both in VR and on other platforms. So I'm kind of the on-the-grounds project manager kind of guy, and then he's the grand visionary genius. So that's always fun.
Okay, great. Maybe Beth, you can introduce yourself next.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Dyer, and I'm at the University of New England in Maine. We have a campus in Portland, Maine, and Biddeford, Maine, and a small campus in Tangier, Morocco. We are primarily health professions education. We do have a traditional undergraduate, College of Arts and Sciences, but we also have Maine's only medical school, the only dental college in northern New England, and all the allied health professions, College of Pharmacy and others. We don't do any VR development, but we kind of fell into a project we're in our 4th year of using really a specific VR app for education for our students. And I can talk more about that. And we have pretty small staff. We're about 6,000 FTE in terms of students, and we only have about 20 library staff. So yeah, that's what I can talk more about our specific project when we get to that part.
That would be great. We'll definitely come back to that. I think our last person is Michael. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So I'm Michael Moore. I'm the Grants Administration and Special Projects Librarian at the University of Washington Health Sciences Library. It's kind of an awkward, verbose job title. It's kind of vague because anything could be a special project, but it does offer me the opportunity to work on a lot of different things, including a lot of data-related stuff. So I support the Translational Research and Information Lab, or TRAIL, which is a 5-partner collaboration on campus with various health services providers. And we focus on kind of things like clinical data, clinical support, and exploring how VR can be used to support clinical healthcare. There's also a physical trail space in the Health Sciences Lab that I support, which has things like a data wall, VR setup, and things like that.
Awesome. Okay, I think that is everyone. Let me know if I may have forgotten someone there. So I think the first thing we were thinking we would do is to pose some questions that we all have. This is a new endeavor to think about partnering people across campus with libraries. So I think what we want to do is just pose some questions that we're interested in getting the audience involved with as well, because we'd love to hear other insights or ideas from the audience. But also, I'm monitoring the Slido channel and the Slack channel, so if anyone has questions, please post them there. It's Panel Libraries on Slack. The first question that we wanted to pose is, why libraries for VR? I know a lot of you talked about how you're using VR in your libraries, but maybe some of the researchers could jump on, or some of the librarians, and just give an idea of why libraries might be a good setting for thinking about building out VR on institutions and campuses.
If it's okay, I'd love to jump in. I have to leave at 2 o'clock to teach a class, unfortunately, so I'm only going to be here in the beginning. But yeah, libraries have been fantastic partners in all sorts of tech spaces. I think that there's all the traditional things that we know and love, like getting equipment and space and all those kinds of things. But there are some really complicated problems with tech, and we can actually see some fail cases that we need libraries to sort of solve for us. So I do a lot of medical games and apps, and I frequently get researchers who have grants who come to me that want to develop something. And I'll never forget the day when I had someone who wanted to do a diabetes game. And so they had this big grant, they wanted to do a diabetes game. And so I told them to come back in a week, and then I had to ask them, why do they want to be the 29th diabetes game? And the problem is there is nowhere for them as a researcher to go that these projects had been curated or were discoverable or even archived, right? And so I think because VR is starting to catch on in universities as a research topic again, right? Like it was in the 90s, we're looking for places that can do that kind of work that's tremendously important. And more importantly than curation, discovery, and archiving is also setting standards for it. So people have been trained in the practices of libraries about how to access information with libraries and with librarians. But that same thing hasn't happened with software yet, right? So we haven't seen a big push to educate users on how to use libraries with software. And I think VR just refreshes that opportunity in an amazing way and can accelerate us tremendously. We think we do a decent job in our lab of finding stuff, but still, at the end of the day, we'll be 6 months into a project wishing we knew about other projects or what other people were doing.
And just to add to that, one of the biggest problems you have with any sort of software that's being developed for a research purpose is, really getting it disseminated to a broader audience. And so one of our first collaborations with the library was building an archiving system and a website and all sorts of stuff to go with that, where now every one of our projects is hosted. So every single semester we finish our collection of projects and we upload them to this. It's called eChannel, but it's essentially a resource to be able to store and disseminate these types of projects.
Anyone else want to add to that? Yeah, Beth, go ahead.
I just think, as libraries, we're always looking for ways to add value to our services. And we're really good connectors in the university setting because we work with every department and faculty from all over. So by doing virtual reality as an educational tool and hosting it in the library, we're kind of bringing in a lot of students and faculty who might not necessarily come into the library, and we're creating a lot more connections with faculty. So we also have a pretty close relationship with ITS, which helps. And just the faculty librarian collaboration is hugely helpful because that's basically our route to the students. And so that's been a really great product of VR. And I think it is sort of a natural fit. We also have very expanded hours. So our library is actually open 24 hours, 5 days a week, and then some hours on the weekend too. So we allow students to access the VR equipment at their own convenience. Unlike, for instance, maybe the SimLab, which is 8 to 4 or something, we have really wide access for students.
Great, thanks. So I think this brings us to our sort of next question, which also a question just came in on Slido that I think a lot of us are thinking about at this point in time, which is what are the benefits and limitations of library spaces and services for virtual reality engagement? And I know one of the limitations that we're all thinking about right now, in particular in response to this COVID-19 crisis, is that these are shared pieces of equipment. So one of the questions that has come in is, how should we think about these shared spaces? One of the limitations may be that they are sharing equipment, and we have to think about cleaning that equipment. And I know this is a very recent development, and so many of you may not have thought about this for very long, but I think it would be great to discuss this because I know our lab and others have thought about this going forward.
If one of the things that's hard about VR is that the equipment is exciting, right? And when people look at VR, they love to see the headsets, but we don't think that way about computers anymore, right? Like libraries aren't about getting people computers, right? Or getting people TVs or getting people these things, right? The things are exciting and immediately accessible, but they're all dead in 18 months anyway, right? The real interesting thing here is how do we get them the software and more importantly, the knowledge around the software. I mean, there's millions of headsets in the wild already. And it's good, it's important to onboard brand new people by making headsets accessible. But we all know when we go into the library, like I was in a library in Australia, and they joked that every time someone put on a headset, it was to play Beat Saber, right? And so it's a great place for that first engagement. But how do we, I think this is a moment, especially when we're all sequestered or quarantined, to ask the next level question, which is, what does it look like to do the work around research and knowledge around this and not just be a provider of stuff? Because I actually think libraries have that problem solved already, how to provide stuff, right? And the next questions are really exciting ones for libraries to solve.
I think too, it's important to think of kind of, and this was brought up before by Greg, is about ways that we're managing these projects in terms of the data management plans, ways that there are people in the community and on campus that are already creating these, and what are ways that we could assist them in preparing plans for grants or creating different identification so that they can find other researchers that are doing this work, ways that we can connect them with the scholarly works that are being distributed through articles or books or through avenues like this conference. And so I think part of that is also a really advantage to having kind of libraries work with research groups, and something to think about that doesn't really need that physical space to it.
Yeah, if I can add to that, one of our projects was to work with clinicians and to take like patient-specific MRIs and CTs, which are fundamentally like two-dimensional slices, and put them together and create a 3D model you can view in VR. And one of the questions we had is, how do you deal with these models? If you want to be able to use them to share with other institutions so they can learn about it, the concept of metadata around VR and medical VR is really in its infancy. I know there's some work being done now about VR, particularly about medical VR, and how you get patient-specific models and all the components of that, and be able to share it is something that I think librarians innately have a lot of experience with and be able to contribute to.
I think from a research angle, there's also, librarians occupy this really interesting space because they understand the academic world, but then they also have access to these different types of technologies. So one of the problems we see with VR is that there's tons of people developing, tools and games and things like that for VR, but they don't necessarily know what it looks like to build a VR game that can be studied well. Or you go to talk to academics and they don't understand software development enough to be able to limit the scope of a project to one really small thing. And so I think part of this journey too is building a common vocabulary and a common experiential base that allows academics and developers to work together. And I think librarians can be, just amazing facilitators of that process.
Yeah, one of the questions, and Beth, will come right back to you, that has just come in, I think that's related to this, is thinking about how to make this happen in certain library settings. So like when people are developing new things, like Greg brought up, how are libraries sort of handling that? Because often you need to have administrator access to machines in order to make changes and do modifications. If you're a librarian who's kind of worked on this, maybe on the research side or the instruction side, how have you sort of handled some of this? And Beth, also feel free to respond to the previous question as well.
Well, I was going to just follow up for a second on the previous question, just in terms of logistics. I mean, you specifically talked about sort of infection control, and that we identified that as an issue early on the ground with the equipment, because we had faculty assigning a certain software product to a class of 180 medical students that all had to do this, in a window of 3 weeks or whatever. So you had, 200 people using 3 headsets, and the early headset we used was just a foam lining. Now they do have some leather linings, but it was no way to really clean it effectively. And I felt like the equipment so far has really not been developed for institutional use. It seems like it's really geared towards individual use. So that's something that developers could think about. If we really want this to become like a mainstream educational tool, we have to make the equipment better for institutional use and better able to be cleaned and sanitized. I would love to see, like disposable liners, paper liners, that every user could have their own liner on the headset. Right now we're just using wipes, but obviously now we're not doing anything. The libraries are closed, and we're not going to share that equipment right in this environment, but it is a challenge. So I just wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, that's great. I think another question that's come in is exactly what you just were referring to, Beth, is that especially for devices like the Quest, you have to have an individualized account in order to set up on that device. And so how have you as libraries thought about how to handle this equipment? So it's hard to let someone check that out, because then they might need to have that individualized account in order to program with it. Has it been more of keeping it in the library, or students have they been allowed to check them out for periods of time, and how have you sort of handled that infrastructure piece?
So I can speak to that a little bit. In terms of Quests, I think this actually speaks to a larger technical question. That's, how do we empower our users to make the changes? If they're developing software or something, they do need administrator access. So finding kind of new ways of managing that has been one of the primary challenges for us. We also had to spin up really a whole team of individuals to support users that might be trying out a piece of software for the first time. You know, it's not like a book where you check it out and the user just automatically knows how to use it. There has to be some kind of intermediate support there. In terms of the quests, what we've opted to do is really we circulate them and say you are responsible for a phone with the app, and we haven't been able to provide any software. I mean that speaks to another challenge here, right? No matter what the platform is, they're not well designed for institutional or enterprise use, right? If we were running a gaming cafe, there's software for that. You buy a license and it works. If you're an individual, it works great. You buy a license and it works. If you're an institution that wants to create access to this stuff, we make it up as we go along. And so it's been a case by case, like sometimes, and that's not just a difficulty from software providers. It's also a difficulty from the institution. It doesn't sound good when I want to buy a game, you know, for my users to use, but at the same time, that game might be used in all kinds of coursework and things like that. So there are so many questions with this. To speak to the physical, the germ issues, you know, having non-porous surfaces is really important. We do have kind of standard practices of wiping down keyboards and mice and work surfaces and things like those. So having those procedures set in place where somebody goes to a classroom and actually physically wipes down anything that's touching a human, those things are in place. We have sanitary wipes nearby our stations. We actually do have some of the paper masks that we allow people to use. But all of those feel like kind of holdovers because, you know, no matter how I reconfigure my headset, it still has a cloth piece. You know, I can buy the best cover, but there's still a surface that's not ideal. So yeah, there's a handful of challenges here.
Yeah, so on the Slack channel, thanks. Someone brought up, and we had been looking at this in our lab as well. There's a new technology called CleanBox that you can put your HMD in. They're quite expensive, though I understand, like $1,600 to put a headset in. But that might be something to think about for the future. I also had one of our developers at the University of Utah check into our channel and said that for development across devices that they check out, they just made one development account and gave everyone access. So that might be something that people could consider doing in the future. One of the other questions that's come up is sort of partnering with people teaching larger classes. And I think this is something where our library TJ's group has really excelled. We have a great outfitted classroom now with these HMDs. And libraries are kind of not filled with books as much anymore. So I think one of the benefits that we could all talk about, and maybe you could talk about how this has happened across your libraries, is how can you garner a significant amount of library space to have classrooms set up? How have you worked that out with your institutions?
So space has always been a challenge for us. When we bought our first head-mounted displays in 2016, we had no floor space for them. It was more of a, let's purchase this equipment, set it up, see how it gets used. On day one, I was worried about, you know, the physical safety of not really the user in the headset, but the people walking past them. So just figuring out how can we make more secure facilities. So we were putting up stanchions and things like that. Early on, we realized we needed a teaching space. We had classrooms coming into a big open computer lab to, you know, really introduce 30, 35 students to a new piece of technology. And they would all crowd around in a computer lab full of other people. So it wasn't ideal. But at the same time, you know, it was those interactions that created the need for a classroom. I guess to spell out the process that we went through to get this classroom, we started with a campus-wide survey that really said, you know, here's the state of the technology. We'd like to be able to provide this, but we can't make moves into this space without an expressed need from our users. So we had a pretty good response from campus about what the need was. We were able to translate that into a request that really got kicked around a whole lot and ultimately landed in a classroom.
In addition to TJ's comments, I just wanted to add the importance of embedding a librarian within those courses that might be doing a VR component. So we have several librarians that actually partner with faculty so that we can either go into their classrooms and set up those equipment or talk about ways in which we've had some sort of sharing component of it. Roger has to head out. Have a good class. And so part of that, I think, is trying to partner with the librarian as soon as possible when choosing to plan those classes out so that we can certainly make accommodations and find ways to support that teaching.
Yeah, Beth, we'd love for you to comment on this, because I think one of our big questions here is how libraries and departments can partner together in terms of increasing instruction for students and making it a different experience.
Well, I echo Brandon's sentiment that it's all about faculty librarian collaboration and partnering with faculty and getting into the classroom and sort of helping facilitate the whole experience. So that's what we do. We partner with faculty from the various programs, but we are not at the point where we don't even have a VR classroom. We don't really bring equipment into their classroom, so they have to come to the library to do the experience. So we're actually facilitating it at that point as well. But space is a huge challenge. I mean, we also bought our first equipment in 2016. I have to put in a plug for the National Library of Medicine, funded our grant, and we're actually on our 4th year of grant funding with them. So the first year we considered a pilot project, and every year we're like, we're going to figure out how to do this right, after the pilot's over, but we keep piloting. So we really feel like it's kind of temporary space. We've got stations kind of tucked into different corners of the library, and we don't have a dedicated setup, so it's not ideal. But we were concerned, like TJ, about safety, and people feel kind of vulnerable in the set, and if there are people walking around them and they can't see, so we're trying to get sort of some private areas where people feel safe, where the equipment is safe, because it is expensive equipment. When we first got the grant, we envisioned being able to check out like portable kits in Pelican cases, and that was quickly unrealistic because they're really not plug and play at this point. So we have to keep all of our, stations set up and ready to go. And even that requires a fair amount of maintenance.
Yeah, I think our situation is pretty similar to Beth's, and we're a smaller operation. Our trail space existed before VR. We also had a funding from a library organization called Institute of Museum and Library Services to do our grants. And so one thing, because we're a smaller space, and part of that is because of, I'm sure anybody who's working in academia knows there's a lot of politics in academia. And so the question of who takes the first step into VR for education has been a back and forth. And so we haven't necessarily gone as deep into it as other people on the panel. So we just have our individual trail space. And one of the things we focused on was the idea of kind of like a layer. So VR is a layer. And so when VR is not being used, that limited floor space in the library can be used for other stuff. So we have something called REDCap classes, which is like a data collection tool. So we've got weekly classes for that and other sorts of things going in the space. And the idea that you have limited space and not everybody's going to use it for VR. And so you need to be able to, take VR off and on. And thankfully VR, because it's just, a couple lighthouses up there, is not a big issue, but something that we definitely focused on.
And I'll just jump in from our perspective, where we're trying to disseminate actual treatments to patients with diabetes, for example, or educational content, things like that. We've really struggled knowing how to do that effectively with VR headsets, and sometimes that's meant setting up a couple computers and headsets in a remote clinic. More often, though, it's been designing the software so that it could be deployed on a disposable headset. So, for example, a cardboard headset or things like that. We spent a while trying to figure out, oh, how are we going to get this many people through this system, and how are we going to account for losses of equipment or damage or things like that. And when we finally looked at the numbers, it was a lot cheaper just to give everyone a disposable headset and have them use their phone as the display. I don't know. So there's also something you said of delocalizing the learning environment, saying, hey, we're going to learn about this tool or this infrastructure here, and then go off into the world and find your own applications, or, go back home and study additional content that we've prepared for you. I think there's just lots of potential with different grades of headsets as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really good idea with the disposable HMDs at this point in time. One of the questions that just came in is, which departments are people generally partnering with on campus? Can you talk about some of the variety or the variety of departments that maybe you've worked with and how you're working with them? So are you helping them to develop software, or are you using sort of off-the-shelf software with them? How have these partnerships sort of progressed? It could also be not just research, but with instruction, obviously, too.
So I can at least start the conversation here. We've seen a lot of interest from the humanities, actually. I get a lot of creative writing courses, people that are interested in literature. 40 years ago, there was a lot of science fiction that talked about today, more or less. So there are a lot of courses that are coming in just to kind of put side by side, the science fiction literature of the 70s with today's technology, and thinking about, is this what they said it would be? So there's been a pretty significant push from that angle. There are certainly a lot of teams and groups that come in and want to develop software. And, while the library does facilitate some of that, we don't have nearly the experience that some of our other panelists have. So I'll leave that one maybe to Greg. But certainly we do have to have some level of understanding about, if a student team comes in and says, I want to make VR software, I can't just say, well, here's a headset, right? So we have to be able to meet them somewhere in the middle. So a lot of times, we try to envision, like, what's if they have the energy to go down this path, at least I want to be able to point them in the right direction. So we've done some of that, but like I said, not nearly as much as others.
And so on our side of things, we are developing software on a consistent basis with partners from across campus, and that can look like social workers who want to create 360 environments of homes to carry out assessments to see whether children can stay there. It can be surgeons who want to recreate a specific task. It can be, diabetes educators. So we've worked with pretty much every department on campus. I mean, even dance. We've built a choreography, virtual reality simulator, all sorts of stuff. But in terms of sort of facilitating that, one of our big goals beyond, so we employ a bunch of graduate students, and beyond just educating those graduate students, one of our kind of win states is when a partner or a researcher has enough experience in game development and VR development that we can say, hey, we'll hire the people for you now, but you're the project manager, and you have the tools to be able to succeed. And so that's, it's a constant educational process. A lot of people come in and say, well, I have $500 and I want to develop this amazing VR environment that parallels or that rivals the best of the VR environments out there. And some of our job is setting expectations and making sure that we scope projects appropriately and that we have enough money up front to actually be able to carry them through, just because it is so foreign a concept for people. And even if they're familiar with software development, developing for VR is a different experience entirely, with different concerns and costs and skill sets that are required. So it can be complicated, but I think the biggest thing is you get your feet wet and you learn a little bit at a time, and you make lots of mistakes, and hopefully over time those mistakes help you make fewer mistakes in the future. And that's certainly been our experience.
To go off that as well, I think it really takes a faculty champion. So we have a faculty member in dentistry who really had a vision that they could simulate some of their training in an online virtual environment. And so working with that faculty member and then introducing them to different resources on campus, giving them an opportunity to explore, and like Greg mentioned, kind of take the lead in terms of some of the project management roles, really allowed that partnership to flourish. And so I think it's people kind of reaching out, and that's why we created this kind of research group within our library space, and we host events. We also do like training workshops where we host workshops on how to use Unity and different tools, and hopefully build that skill set up. So not only are you helping those students, but also you're introducing those to faculty that might not know that as an option for their teaching, and that could be a good resource for them.
So I can speak. Greg, you're doing some amazing things there. That's really exciting. Our project is pretty narrow in scope. We really are mainly using one thing, which is software from Embodied Labs, and its purpose is to teach empathy to future healthcare providers, so that when you have, the headset on, you are the patient, and future physicians or PAs or whatever can experience what it might be like, to be on that side of the table. So what better technology, right, to help with that? So we started, like Brandon said, a faculty champion was a geriatrics professor in the College of Medicine. And then we have expanded, and now we've worked with physician assistants, physical therapy, occupational therapy, social work, pharmacy. And then we've had some undergraduate courses like sociology of aging. And the labs that we're working with so far are all around age-related conditions. The headline that sort of caught my eye to when I first learned about this product was, how do you make a 24-year-old medical student know what it's like to be a 74-year-old man with, macular degeneration or hearing loss? So that's kind of the focus of our project. Our nursing program has just launched into a new VR product, which is quite different, and it's from Oxford Medical Simulation out of England, and that's a decision-making tool where you're the healthcare provider and have to make decisions based on the information you learn in the scenario. But the product we're using is kind of it requires specific hardware, so. Because it's immersive, we have to, we can't, for instance, use the cardboard and that sort of thing. So.
Sort of related to this topic, another question that's come in has been whether or not you've partnered with departments or researchers doing user studies, and do we think this could help increase diversity in people's samples if you have done that? I know most of this has been sort of centered around instruction, but maybe some of the things that have gone on have been connecting with researchers who are trying to do user studies. I know our lab has started using some of the flex space in the library to run experiments in larger scale spaces. And it's been really interesting because we often have participants coming who are signed up, but in the process, we've had lots of students approach us and ask us if they can just partake in the study because they want to know what's going on. Why is someone wearing a HoloLens or an HMD in the middle of the library? But maybe others of you have had some partnerships like that. So if you have, please talk about them.
One of the services our library has been offering is a focus group. So we will, if a faculty member is interested in hosting kind of a focus group around something, including virtual reality, that's something that our library has been trained in and can assist in. And so the library, I think, is also a good space for this because, Janine, you mentioned kind of diversity of that audience, and the library having that reach that can meet students from those different disciplines, where within those specific fields you might be limited to that population, really gives some added voice to those projects. And so I think I've been a part of one of those, and it was virtual reality focused or augmented reality. And we got some great insight from those students that we normally don't hear from in these studies. So kind of getting away from that kind of stereotypical VR user and looking at other users and seeing their perspectives and how that can enlighten that product has been really insightful.
I'll just jump in for a sec. So we've developed a couple of different VR tools for target populations that are kind of outside of the typical VR demographic. So for example, Latina women over 50, trying to use VR to teach them about diabetes management and things like that. And so the way we've actually accessed those populations is by going out to community health centers or, even just plain community centers, places where they're doing, open markets or, quilting days and things like that, and looking for participants there. But that's been actually really successful. Salt Lake has kind of this interesting phenomenon where everyone wants to help out with medical research. They're just so intent on it, and you tell them that it's for a medical study, and they're so excited to do it. But the other side of that is that a lot of these people have never really gotten to experience, using VR or even using high-tech software in general. And so I remember there was one woman who said, "Oh, my son's been wanting to do VR for a year now, and I get to do it before him." So that was kind of a fun experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing that because I think it is really important. We've heard this through multiple sessions to think about diversifying our participant groups a bit more, and this is a good way of thinking about doing it. I know some of you have talked about this, but one of the other questions we wanted to address was whether or not libraries could facilitate industry donor grant partnerships that might help to support researchers at these institutions or across institutions.
I look at the level, like we'll call it the service profile that the library has in terms of virtual reality. And really what we've done is tried to create a blanket approach where we have we cover all the bases, right? So if people want to develop, they can get started. If they want to take a headset home, we help them do that. And so really, it's been just a series of challenges of working through, like how do we circulate a Pelican case full of 16 components that all have to be plugged in just the perfect configuration to get this working. And I think that type of blanket approach lends itself well to creating those partnerships, just because here we have a classroom, but it's not clear that it's only for the game development students or only for the medical sim development teams. It can be used for any number of things. So we've had some external groups bring in groups of therapists, for example, to do some trainings, really just discovering what the potential of the technology is and kind of familiarizing a population with the technology. I could see something along the lines of a development grant that would use components of a library service. We haven't, well, and it might even be, that might be an arrangement where we don't necessarily know that much about that relationship, because it's almost like, we provide this access, but we don't mediate it in such a way to know exactly, what it's being used for. But I could see it working in a grant perspective.
I was gonna say that, yeah, like libraries have pretty robust donor bases. Like most academic libraries and other libraries have like a friends of the library who are engaged. And certainly there is a subsection of that is kind of the more traditional, like rare books focused group, but a large part of it is more about the idea of like information. and they're not tied to the idea of information as just as books or as journals or other traditional resources. I found my current institution and past ones, they're really interested in like things like impact and how you can, especially when it comes to students, how you can shape the impacting the education of students for the future. And so like for our project, we had a clinician who came to talk to a library group of donors just about his vision for how medical education could be done in the future. And he just took the roof off. Like, he's a very engaging speaker, but like these are people who didn't necessarily have medical backgrounds and were not aware of VR. But once they heard about it and once they could hear about the impact learning in VR could have, they were just enthralled. And I think libraries can create that connection. So like Beth was mentioning before about creating connections on campus. I think it's also really opportunities to connect researchers and educators with potential donors from the library base they may otherwise not be thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. One of the questions also that's come up is, how did you, who are librarians or who are working in libraries, how did you build your skill set to be able to think about supporting VR work? Because that's maybe not training that a lot of people have had that have worked in or are working in libraries. What advice do you have for people who maybe are thinking about approaching people in their libraries and thinking about what are the skills they would need and how they might develop those?
Again, we're just, on the user side, not the developing side, but my experience is academic librarians already usually have an inclination to technology. I mean, we have to stay current because, historically we've had to adapt to changing technology for hundreds of years. So I think it's just having the interest and the inclination to want to try new things and to have the support of your administration, obviously, because it does take a little bit of time. This has turned into be a lot more time than I bargained for. And it's just been, learning by doing, basically. And I never would claim to be an expert by any means, but it's been, I think librarians by nature like to delve into things and, do literature searches on everything as we're learning and, collect the scholarly literature and put that together with the hands-on and then just try to make things work. So it's just learning more every day. And again, it takes a lot of IT support as well, because we need that expertise.
I think libraries are also known to have a robust student workforce. And so something we've been utilizing is our students. A lot of them have interest in VR. They're either playing it at home or doing it with their siblings. And so giving them the opportunity to kind of dive into that and use their kind of what they consider hobby as something they could actually kind of do work in is really exciting for them. So a lot of our VR projects and specifically the development work has come out of our student workforce. And so we have a team of about 3 student artists and 2 student developers who are working within the library to help partner with those faculty members that want kind of prototypes for different VR learning projects. So.
And I was just hearing what Beth had said, sort of about curiosity. Like, my background is in English literature. Roger's background was in religion and philosophy. Like, no one in our development lab came through a traditional, coding background or anything like that. And now we're all developing medical and educational games. And so I think a lot of it is having the curiosity to ask the questions that other people aren't asking. And then the humility to ask for help from people who are better, at what you're trying to do. We've definitely benefited from, the good graces of all sorts of IT people. We go in and say, hey, we're really dumb and we don't know what to do next. Help us out. And so I think anyone who has an interest in this can get involved. And there are communities that somehow just spring up out of nowhere. That have sort of been there all along. So I would just encourage people to sort of, chase that dream or harbor that curiosity.
Yeah, like echo everything that was said. A lot of it is just, taking your first step into it is just most important thing. I do think buy-in from management is crucial and can sometimes be a challenge. So I don't know who said it before, but having like an assessment and evaluation of on campus what people need and having that as data to support what you want to do, I think is a great first step. And then I think as technology on a personal level has made it more accessible to, I can go out and buy my own VR headset, and everybody here could have their own headset in a way that, 20 years ago may not have been feasible. If that's interesting to you, you can do it yourself in a way that for the large projects, you need to have maybe a donor base or funding, but you can have your own personal projects. And I think I would hope most academic libraries and other libraries would have the bandwidth to support the growth of their employees.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to say this is all fascinating and give people an opportunity to talk about what's exciting. So one of the questions has been, what's one of the most exciting things that you're working on, or where do you see the libraries being in 5 years in terms of VR infrastructure or projects that might be ongoing that could be really cool in the coming years?
So the most exciting thing for me about all of this is just the speed at which this technology is developing. So yeah, I mean, in 2016, we kind of brought in our first head-mounted displays, and now here we are 4 years later, and I don't know. We could list a whole bunch of products that have just blown us away over and over. I get the sense that it's still very early in terms of what can happen with this technology. So we haven't seen really clear answers as far as what the extent of this as a brain-computer interface is. How are we, the amount of development that's going on around user interfaces and that kind of thing is really exciting. Certainly gaming has us all on the edge of our seats. And the ability to communicate with other people, especially in such a distant time. So I guess I'm excited about a whole lot of stuff. The one other component is thinking about ways to utilize our large open spaces if we have them. There aren't a bunch of places where you can go and kind of secure, a 25 by 25 foot room to do multi-user kind of co-located stuff. So I'm also pretty excited about the future of arena interactions and that kind of thing.
So I'll jump in and say I'm most excited for social VR. We're working on a simulation right now that allows surgeons and nurses in remote locations to work with a simulation technician to be able to train on different stabilization techniques. And that's all super cool. But for me, I was just in a VR headset before this call, trying out VR Chat, which is sort of a social VR platform where you can put on an avatar and then talk to people. And I had never played before, but I get in, and within 2 minutes, there's this little German boy who's 8 years old. I understood very little German. He understands very little English, but he wanted to teach me how to play the game and how to navigate the space. And so here I am as a robot talking to a little German boy who's in the shape of a cat, and he's teaching me, a 30-year-old, how to use technology that I develop on every single day. And it was, just one of the most precious, authentic, heartwarming experiences that I've had in a while. And I think there's a lot of hope for humanity in this idea of, creating democratized virtual spaces, creating spaces where we get to choose our own identity, where we're not judged by, what we might look like or our educational background. If we want to be a cat, a benevolent cat, we can do that. And I think there's going to be a lot of rethinking that happens around, even the notion of physical spaces as a result of that. How do we how do we take the lessons learned in VR and bring them back into places like libraries? How do we take the the empowerment and the democratization of virtual platforms and use them as tools to make the world a better place too?
That's hard to follow, Greg. But just sort of logistically speaking, and what TJ said, it's this is such a fast changing landscape in terms of hardware and software. And I look forward to it in the near future. And maybe you guys are already using this, but is untethered, no computer attached, no cables attached, wireless, just maybe being able a student to go to the library desk and check out the headset and have the preloaded apps and have it be really user friendly and affordable. So right now the product we're using doesn't work that way. So that would be exciting, and I echo too all the excitement around every day reading about applications, new applications, especially like in therapeutic environments for helping patients, and educational environments, corporate training. It's just really exciting. Yeah.
Well, something I'm really excited by is just the wide range of backgrounds and interests people within the VR community come from. And that just kind of came to fruition by having this virtual reality kind of research group. And it was really nice to actually have each or many of those individuals share their projects through a symposium. So that's something we were able to hold last year. And it was just a really nice event to come together and kind of share in each other's triumphs and kind of work through some issues that some people were having with their projects, and find ways that we connect with one another. So I know a lot of new projects have now formed out of that community, which is really nice, including this panel as part of that. So really exciting to see that. And then also inviting some world-class speakers to come. I know Maria Sanchez-Vivas came and talked about her project doing rehabilitation work in domestic violence. And so really getting to hear from those kind of change makers in the community and in the VR world that can have an effect on all of us. And then being able to talk through some of those things has really helped us as a campus community. So I'm really excited to see kind of the future. I know one faculty member actually is teaching a virtual reality course where he's asking his students to take faculty projects and make kind of prototypes out of them. And so that's kind of something we're looking at for next year in the fall semester, is having faculty that might not have other ways of getting kind of a project started to fill out a form, and it would go to this class, and then they would work through it and come up with kind of a product that they can show and maybe get more funding to do more work. So
one thing I'm interested in is just because on my mind, and so many of the emails I get from work right now have to deal with open educational resources like OER, and I'm curious how that'll translate into VR. Obviously, we're right in the middle of COVID right now, and so the long-term impact is still to be determined. But I can't see how it would not have drastic impact on how librarians and libraries and educators are sharing their resources. I think VR at the current stage is in its infancy comparatively, and so like OER is a bit down the road. But it is so present on my mind right now. Like I was talking before about using anatomical models for education for all the health sciences school. And to me, that's like an area that could, be perfect for open educational resources in the future. Anatomical models aren't changing. A fibula is still going to be a fibula. I think that as we change as libraries and how we provide and how the educational model changes, I'm curious to see how VR will adapt as well.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're out of time. We're like perfectly on time. So thank you to all of the panelists for contributing here. I'm really just excited to continue this discussion. I think bringing libraries together with departments and industry is just really an exciting future thing to consider for lots of different reasons, for instruction, for research, and more. So thanks everyone for being involved in the panel. Thank you, Brandon, for coordinating us. And I think that we will sign off, but the Slack channel is open and there's lots of discussion going on there. So I encourage people to keep it going. And if you have any comments or questions later on in the conference, we'll totally be monitoring that channel and checking in. So thanks for tuning in for our panel and have a good rest of the conference, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janine.
Bye.
Bye. Nice
Bye.
to meet everybody.
You too.